So did the camera get positioned in the right way? I guess we'll see. Just come up and adjust it if you need to. So just a little piece to think about there by Eckhart Tolle. If you're not taking responsibility for your state of consciousness, you are not taking responsibility for your life.
Please speak
And if you
louder.
can't get out of it, what then? Long ago and far away, I was fortunate to be able to take a class from Parker Palmer, who some of you are aware of or know. Parker is a Quaker author and educator who focuses on issues in education, on community, and what it means to be a community. He's a leadership kind of person in the Quaker community, and he's a spiritual director. He's interested in all kinds of things that I think most of us are interested in. He's a prolific writer. And perhaps you have also heard him on two different programs that Krista Tippett hosts. One was speaking of faith, and then on being. And when he talked about his struggles with depression for much of his life, and you wouldn't necessarily expect that from someone who is so eloquent about so much, to find out that he has struggled mightily with depression. Depression and anxiety and anger and rage and discontent and dis-ease are things that we all suffer from in various ways today, both individually and as a society. So I thought it might be relevant to share some of what I learned from Parker Palmer, listening to him over the years. Many years after I was able to take a class from him in Berkeley, we were trying to create, I was at Finlandia by this time, and we were trying to create a new program there called Great Books and Great Voices. And we were looking for a keynote speaker to help give birth to this new program. Barry Lopez came and was the second keynote speaker. Parker Palmer was the first. And I volunteered, since I knew him just a bit, to figure out a way to interest him enough to consider our invitation to come. Well, he is a busy person. He's a very private person and had many invitations to speak. So even though he lives just down south a bit in Madison, Wisconsin, the question became in my mind, why should he respond to an invitation from a small college in the UP up north? Why would he be interested in coming? What would get him here? And I could have just focused on, the mission statement of our new program, which we thought was exciting, but, for him it was probably a dime a dozen, but hoping that it would be enough to just do that. And I thought, well, it seemed to me a personal invite would be better. And then to my excitement a little bit later, he eagerly responded. But a bit more background now is needed here to explain what I did and how I did. And in most mainline congregations or religious denominations, one of the requirements for ordination is 200 hours of clinical pastoral education, which we affectionately call CPE, in a program with a certified instructor. And a colleague attended a national gathering of CPE students and instructors, at which Parker Palmer was the keynote speaker. And my friend and colleague made a recording on a cassette tape. Yeah, how many of you remember cassette tapes? Okay, all right. So I had this, I don't know where it is anymore, but I had this cassette tape of his presentation because my friend Hans sent it to me. Well, on the tape, after being introduced, Parker began to tease the person who had invited him to come, listing all the touch points that were expected in his presentation. His invitation was a very articulate proposal highlighting all the great importance of this gathering of CPE students. And he was given this long laundry list of essential components that CPE students needed to consider. And then Parker, who has this wonderful sense of humor, concluded, after reading this invitation that he had been sent, by saying that since he was given a whole 45 minutes to do all that, he thought he would throw in his recipe for pumpkin pie. So here's how I invited this great teacher to be the keynote speaker in our new program here in Hancock, Michigan, because I had the tape. I had evidence. I had proof. So I wrote him, word for word, what he said in his introduction to those CPE students. And I changed the name of the program and the location and concluded by including the reference to his recipe for pumpkin pie. And he later told me that as soon as he read it, he had a great belly laugh and he knew he had to accept this invitation. And as I think back, it probably wasn't very academically professional of me to do that, but it worked. It got him here. So I don't have his recipe for pumpkin pie, nor do I have one of my own, but I do have a story that I would like to tell you that he told in that talk to CPE students. It seems that Parker had signed up for an outward bound rock climbing program on Hurricane Island in Maine. And he commented that the name of the island should have probably warned him off, but he went anyway. Outward Bound, I don't even know if Outward Bound still exists, but Outward Bound put people in challenging and extreme conditions as a way of helping them learn and grow. Unlike some TV shows today, the program's goal of Outward Bound was to build you up through experiential and outdoor education, not challenge you until you broke, till you completely broke down, and then everyone else drops out of and there's one winner who then gets a lot of money as a prize. That's not what Outward Bound was doing. So, at least for beginners, rock climbing, how many of you have rock climbed here? Okay, a couple of you know a little bit about it. Rock climbing includes, obviously, climbing up while being roped in, especially for beginners. You know, this is you're roped in carefully and safely, and you feel somewhat safe as you're doing this, though it doesn't really feel that way when you're doing it sometimes. But you are depending on your skill that you have hopefully learned in a bit of an orientation. You're depending upon your strength and your guts and your equipment. And part of that equipment includes another person, at least for beginners, at the top. And rock climbing also includes rappelling down the rock face, which looks like a great deal of fun. And it is, for some. It also can be terribly frightening, as it involves one of the most counterintuitive movements of the body and the mind in human experience. So here's what I recall from my first time rappelling down a steep spire in the Black Hills of South Dakota. We made it up, and now we got to go down, or had to go down. Get back down safely. And that meant, technically speaking, running a rope that was wrapped around the waist of a person, around the back of a person on top, who would belay you as you rappelled down the rock face through a carabiner that is connected to a harness worn around your hips and around your butt, and you're safely, carabined in. The rope goes through the carabiner, and you're all set to go. We weren't connected to a tree at the top or to an anchor spike pounded into the rock. We had to trust another person, and of course we had to trust ourselves. So as you descend, then you hold one side of the rope with one hand as you feed it through the carabiner through your other hand, and the rope goes around you through the carabiner, and then that functions as a brake. And so you are gradually releasing yourself down the rock face. It's all about you at that moment in time. So I know when you learn about the equipment on the flat ground, it feels fine. Yeah, I can do this. Up on the top, getting ready to descend is a little different experience. So you begin by putting tension on the rope, and you begin to walk backwards then till you get to the very edge and then you lean, you're standing on the rock face, and you begin to lean back. Plant your feet. Don't forget to plant your feet solid. You begin to lean back until you are perpendicular to the rock face. And you are then 90 degrees to the world with nothing between you and the bottom but air, which doesn't support a body very well. And now you are completely dependent upon the person who is above, and you're dependent on your equipment, and hopefully you checked everything before you began, but mostly you're dependent on yourself. If you panic and decide you don't like being 90 degrees, suspended over nothing, and you decide to reduce your angle to what seems like it might be safer 45-degree angle, you will lose the tension that your feet have with the rock face, and you will smash into the rock, which can, at a minimum, be somewhat painful. So, back to Parker. This kind, gentle, fairly large, good-natured philosopher described creeping backward to that ultimate counterintuitive lean back over nothing moment to these CPE students. And he talked about what was going on with himself, his knees shaking, his voice quaking, his hands sweating, and his mind racing, wondering what the hell he was doing this for. But somehow he then managed to make that backward lean and then slowly began to walk backward down the rock face, till he got about halfway down, when he says, "I just froze." Some moments later, as he was suspended there, the outward bound instructor down below realized that something was not quite right and called up from below, Parker, are you all right?" and as he told this story, you could hear this deep laughter. Now that he was safe in front of a bunch of students, he heard this deep laughter coming from him as he described his response to this absurd question. "No, I'm not all right. I'm stuck. I can't move." More moments of silence passed, and then he heard the instructor call up from below, "Parker, do you know what the outward bound motto is?" "No, I don't know what it is." And then again, some moments of quiet hanging out. The quiet response from the instructor from below was this: "Then perhaps it's time you learn it." So suspended there at 90 degrees over nothing, he calls down, "Well, what is it?" The instructor called up and said, and perhaps you can guess what it is at this point, "If you can't get out of it, get into it." Well, I think he told that story to CPE students because the goal of clinical pastoral education is not to learn techniques safely on flat ground. It's not to do that, to learn techniques for counseling. It's not a how-to kind of program. It's 400 hours. It's not 200 hours. I made a mistake on that. It's 400 hours of trying to discover your own patterns of thinking and behaving. Learning to understand what makes us do what we do. To go deeper into our own minds and our own hearts, to explore those things that exist inside of us. One of the CPE practices in my prison site in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, was to go out into the yard, into the prison yard, and just hang out, which can be kind of a frightening experience in and of itself. or to go into a common area inside, or sometimes to go into a security lockup cell and talk to an inmate. And then later at night, our homework were verbatims. And I don't know if you've ever done a verbatim before, but you basically write down as best you can, word for word, the entire conversation. And then you share it with your group, your colleagues, and your CPE instructor. And the point was not to critique content, but to talk about why you said what you did, or why you did what you did, which could include why you avoided or went off on a tangent or a counter story rather than hear and respond to what the person you were talking with was saying. Why do I feel afraid at certain circumstances? What am I fearing that makes me want to run away? Or in a relationship, why do I avoid? Why do I not hear? Why do I shut doors rather than respond to the open door that someone is extending me, even though they might not even know they're doing that? Why do I maybe even close those doors and avoid going there? So the typical CPE site is a hospital where one will be faced with fears and hesitations when it comes to talking with someone about discomfort and bodily illness and suffering and dying and death. It's not any different than suddenly finding yourself in any situation that challenges you. If you can't get out of it, get into it, which of course is not simple or easy. But it is an invitation to begin to understand why we do what we do, why we think what we do, and why we say what we say. And it involves recognizing, and if necessary, trying to change our minds. It's a paradigm shift in how we do things and how we say things. And doing so, and this is the caveat, doing so often requires help. That's why you learn to rock climb with partners and people that know what they're doing. It requires help, but recognizing that we need help is often the first very difficult step backwards over that rock face. And we might not literally in our lives be frozen and suspended 90 degrees on a rock face, but we are often there existentially. And the only way to change a situation or a pattern of thinking and acting is to go deeper into it and then deeper down. So I started this morning by saying that depression and anxiety and anger, sometimes rage, discontent and dis-ease are all things that we suffer from today as individuals and as a society. The Outward Bound motto fits if we know how to apply it. If you can't get out of it, get into it. It's partly why we share our joys and concerns together as a community. So going deeper down into it is something that I'm going to pursue with you next week. So I'm just going to leave you hanging out there, flapping in the breeze at this point, but hopefully we are at least flapping together on the currents that can buoy us up. So, thank you.